I didn't have Daemon beheading a young Rhaenyra in a vision on my bingo card for episode 4, The Red Dragon and the Gold. But this episode was pretty incredible. We're essentially at a point where there's no question about the quality of whether or not the action and big battle set pieces will be good or bad. The question is more on how these scenes are written and directed, which were of course done really well, except for a couple minor things that we'll get into. But before going into the Battle of Rook's Rest, there's surprisingly a decent amount of great dialogue scenes. Kind of like episode 2, I think the Red Dragon and the Gold had some incredible character development, albeit not as outstanding as that episode, but Aegon's arc essentially coming to its supposed endpoint was amazing to watch unfold. I love the inherent lose-lose self-fulfilling prophecy of Aegon's incompetence, because Aegon is at a point where he hasn't proved himself, and since he's essentially shackled to the Red Keep, there's not really an opportunity to do so. Not to mention all the undermining going on, which further makes Aegon's job practically impossible. This overall dichotomy, which is really punctuated in his scene with Alicent, kind of turned Aegon into my second favorite character. Which obviously number 1 is Daemon, and sorry, no one is going to be dethroning my golden child of a character. But this overall development for Aegon's character makes him significantly more sympathetic, since he's set up to fail through his situation. Like, this line from Alicent was so crushing, and also made it feel like she just told Aegon he's a failure.
Do simply what is needed of you. Nothing.
Aegon goes from a deplorable piece of trash to a tragic king who was thrust into a position he clearly didn't intend and really even want. And despite his many flaws, he does genuinely want to do his best and wants to be a well-liked and good ruler. It is kind of interesting how Aemond is now the one who is much more sociopathic and crazy. Like, we all probably thought that Aegon would be terrible, but Aemond is significantly scarier and is much more unhinged. Aemond will also probably act in the name of the king, since I think that's symbolically portrayed by him taking Aegon's dagger. I am curious to see how Aemond governs, and I think he'll definitely contrast Aegon as being a much more cruel and unsympathetic king. And since we're kind of on the topic of Aegon being bedridden, I wish the creators created a more plausible scenario for Aegon to survive. Like maybe his dragon being able to slow down his initial impact. But this massive crash seems like Aegon would have been turned into a puddle, and it's a little silly he seemingly survived. I've seen a lot of discussion about whether or not Aegon is still alive, but I thought it was pretty clear that he was just in critical condition, because if they wrote it to where he was dead, they'd probably make that clearer visually. Going back to the relationship between Aegon and Aemond, my favorite scene outside of the battle this episode was definitely Aemond thrashing his brother in Valyrian. It's the first time we've really seen this conflict boil up, and masking this argument in another language was brilliant. And Aegon's response, where he can barely muster a single sentence and sounds like an ape trying to communicate, was hilarious, which this further contrasts the characters and overall competence levels. Also, the council just watching this unfold dumbfounded, as they can only imagine what they're talking about, added an additional layer of humor to the scene. These were the type of scenes that I was looking for in the last episode, and I'm happy that Ryan Condal delivered them in this one. Although it will be sad that we won't get any more Aegon Small Council scenes, and I guess Aemond will now be at the head of them. Which is pretty crazy how drastically the Small Council has been evolving over the past few episodes. The constantly evolving narrative really brings a lot of variety to the Green Council, which further makes every council scene fun and interesting, since we're exploring new dynamics. Daemon in Harrenhal is as good as ever, and there are some definite standout moments, like him throwing the young Tully Lord off guard by sitting so close next to him, causing him to slightly panic. We got some cool lore for Harrenhal, which I wasn't expecting, and I'm really glad we got to hear, and my boy Sir Willem Blackwood is back. I don't know if he'll be very present in the future, but I hope he will be. Also, the introduction of the scene was really clever in matching Daemon sipping the medicine in the cup of water. The man is just flat out losing his mind here, and I'm sure Daemon's journey of taming Harrenhal is actually going to be pretty challenging and interesting. The location is dense with rich history, and the overall spiritual and magical footprint of this location really imbues this entire plotline with heavy conflict. Because without it, I'm sure Daemon's journey of rebuilding Harrenhal's strength and amassing forces wouldn't be as interesting. So I'm happy Ryan Condal is energizing the subplot with a deeper layer of conflict. Then on Rhaenyra's side, it's really weird how in the last episode, we go from Dragonstone to King's Landing in the span of one scene transition, and then in this one, Rhaenyra is absent for half the episode. I know that since there are two primary plot lines, it's hard to mask the passage of time since you can't cut around as much. But since these time jumps are happening so randomly and infrequently, it makes the narrative a little confusing because we don't really know how much time is passing between scenes. During the small council scene at Dragonstone, you kind of assume that Rhaenyra is back, and then you realize, oh, she's still traveling despite that happening instantly last episode. This is by no means a major flaw or anything, and I think this issue could have been completely fixed if they had Rhaenyra leave earlier last episode, establishing a precedence that it at least takes some time to travel despite King's Landing being so close to Dragonstone. I'm also glad that Rhaenyra's met with an upset council since her plan was rightfully pretty bad. I know that from her perspective she wanted to subvert a war, but it was essentially a fool's errand to try to sue for peace and was far too late. But hey, at least we got a good dialogue scene out of it. I'm also happy that Rhaenyra finally sees that her complete inaction is essentially leading her to losing the war, and she finally wants to go to war. Her meeting some friction with Jacaerys was nice as well. There are some other good scenes of note to go into, like Alicent and Larys' dialogue, but let's finally go into the battle sequence since that's what everyone is interested in. Firstly, I love how Ryan Condal writes the beginning with a montage of everyone preparing while there's a voiceover of Rhaenyra revealing a Song of Ice and Fire to Jacaerys in the background. We're simultaneously spared of having to sit through that reveal again by Ryan efficiently setting up the battle visually while we listen to that scene. That and Aegon drunk dragon riding is such an Aegon thing to do, and I love it. I wish they showed him more visually drunk and doing some weird maneuvers during the battle, but that could maybe distract from the gritty nature of the scene with too much humor. Also, I haven't really talked about this yet, but Ramin Djawadi's new theme for this season that first came up during Alicent and Rhaenyra's dialogue scene is complete perfection. It's simultaneously epic, but it also gives off this somber tone that emphasizes how much of a tragedy this war is. Probably because the violins are a pretty emotional instrument, and Ramin is basically a master at writing music with that instrument. But the implementation of that theme throughout this entire battle greatly elevated the emotion, and especially Rhaenys' death. Because honestly, I really didn't care for her that much as a character, since she came across as being kind of dull, but she had a pretty outstanding death scene to the point that it so evoked a strong response from me. Although that was partially for Meleys, because that dragon was precious. But yeah, this was a pretty epic death, albeit it felt a little confusing in terms of Rhaenys' motivation. Because from her perspective, she was absolutely slaying and essentially downed the king and possibly killed him, while also kind of winning her engagement with Vhagar. So her going back and testing her luck again felt questionable because from her perspective, this overall engagement was an incredible victory. I know that for dragon riders in general, it's a much better death to die in battle because, let's be real, who wouldn't want to die like this? However, it's not like there wouldn't be more opportunities in the future for dragon combat. So to me, her perspective felt a little confusing, especially since she was the more rational character on the black side. Like if this was Daemon instead, that would be a believable thing for his character to do. But to be fair, going for the risky play of ending Vhagar would have basically ended the war. As for another minor issue I had, and I promise this is the last one, is that Vhagar being able to sneak up on Meleys was kind of silly. I don't know how this big lumbering beast of a grandma was able to get from the battlefield to the beach in like 1 minute without being spotted by Rhaenys. Along with Aemon being able to time it to where they'd fly up to meet Meleys right when they passed over the castle despite not being able to see them. It feels a bit unrealistic that this would happen, especially since you wouldn't assume the biggest dragon would be capable of stealth. It made more sense at the end of season 1, while here, it felt a bit more forced. Like it genuinely startled me because I wasn't expecting this to happen. But from a power level perspective, it does make sense for Vhagar to best Meleys in a one-on-one combat. With that out of the way, let's address the many positives of the battle. Some brilliant creative decisions were Vhagar's introduction into the battle, where all we see are her wings. It gives off this notion of a shark's fin piercing through the water, and the anticipation of waiting to see Vhagar, and then and finally seeing her in all her glory was a spectacular reveal. Even though it wasn't technically her reveal to us, and her being disappointed that they weren't going to be deployed yet was hilarious. God, I just love the different personalities and designs of the dragons in the show. Another one of the brilliant creative choices was the shot of the dragons in the sky from the perspective of the foot soldiers. You may not think this was anything crazy, but I think there's a subtle wit to this shot because we can easily see the size comparison of Melees and Vhagar, which is something that can kind of be lost in normal shots, and here, we can comprehensively see their size difference through their silhouettes. Then I thought it was really clever the way they showed dragons fighting and the way that they essentially lock their claws together and go into a death spiral. The creators stated that they looked into how hawks fight and took that as inspiration, and I think this also thematically plays into the dance of dragons, because this fight comes off as a bit of a chaotic dance, and I assume that was also another intention. The actual dragon fighting I thought was done in a really interesting way, and there was quite a bit of strategy in terms of every play. Like Aegon just barreling in and Rhaenys being more patient and going in for a critical strike. It is at the end of the day a bit chaotic, but that's the inherent nature of dragon warfare, which is shown really well here by the sheer amount of collateral damage from Vhagar alone. In relation to this, I also love the small moment of the poor soldier who died from being drenched in scorching hot dragon blood. Probably the coolest way an extra has ever died in this show and Game of Thrones. Then, as I said in the beginning, the production value is excellent, and they've even improved on the Dragon Buck filming tech. Like now, they have this robotic arm that can perfectly track its subject, while keeping a specific type of shot framed to a T. Just watching the behind the scenes for that alone, I found to be extremely intriguing.
Fuck me sideways.
It seems much more complicated than Game of Thrones, and from this advancement in tech, it allows the creators to achieve higher quality storytelling, since there are practically no more limitations. But even with this, the practical elements were still outstanding, and the authenticity of having this many soldiers on set and doing their classic Omega burns does wonders for each battle. On paper, trying to execute a battle with 3 dragons flying around and a whole army of soldiers on the ground seems like a logistical nightmare, but the fact that they actually pulled it off and in great fashion, I think is an outstanding achievement. Any minor flaws because of this feel rather inconsequential because the vast majority of the scene is done so insanely well. Like, I doubt you even thought of the pretty major convenience of Aegon arriving right at the exact moment that Aemond was supposed to respond to the signal, but this kind of iffy writing beat doesn't bother you as much because of how great the overall execution of this battle was. That's kind of why so many people love the Battle of the Bastards, but there's obviously a lot more wrong with the writing for that battle than this one. So the action was obviously incredible, and the emotion and characters were also not lost in this chaos, and if anything, were done extremely well and had some great emotional catharsis. I'd love to do a deeper dive into this battle in the future since I'm actually on vacation right now cranking out this video. I'm also really curious to see how any future battles compare to this, because if it gets any bigger and grander than this, then we're in for a pretty incredible treat. Thank you for watching, and hey, I turned on channel memberships. So if you want a shiny and custom badge next to your name in the comments, then it only costs $3. Like, who wouldn't want Bobby B evolving into a god next to your name to show your support for the channel? That and you'd also have access to some custom Game of Thrones emojis that you can use in the comments, and with more members, I can add even more meme face reactions. I'd be very grateful if you wanted to support the channel in this way since I rarely take sponsorships, and I just want to craft the best videos for you. My socials are in the description, and have a great day. As usual, thank you to the best patron ever, Logan Farmer, for contributing the most.